Now here with the latest evening headlines, it's the ITV News at 10.
The world on fire. In a landmark report, the UN set out in the starkest possible terms the threat global warming poses to billions of people all across the globe.
Climate change is a problem that is here now. Nobody's safe, and it's getting worse faster.
As an issue, you can hardly get bigger than a threat to every single one of us, and certainly our children. So tonight on News at 10, devastation in the wake of the Greek wildfires. Ben Chapman on the human cost of the flames.
Events like this are the reality of climate change, which this country is going to have to deal with a lot more.
The problem with methane. Emma reports on the contribution it makes to global warming.
You can't see methane, but you can really smell it. But what's more potent than the smell is methane's ability to trap heat. That's why scientists believe that in reducing emissions, there's the possibility of reducing temperatures across the world.
And we'll talk to Debbie in China about what the world's biggest polluter may or may not be willing to do about it. Also on the programme. Kunduz has fallen as the Taliban continues to sweep through Afghanistan. A-level students await their results tonight as universities warn of record demand. And finally, why the restoration of this British bog is a step in the right direction on climate change.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The warnings issued by global leaders, scientists and politicians after today's huge and definitive United Nations report on climate change are terrifying and, quite frankly, they're meant to be. Code red for humanity, said the head of the UN. Others also reached for their starkest phrases. No one is safe. The alarm bells are deafening. Nowhere to hide. The cool factual terms in which the report itself lays out the now possibly irreversible climate emergency are, however, even more frightening. 14,000 scientific papers went into it. Well, we're in Greece and in America and in China to report on its findings. The world is heating up faster and faster. Climate catastrophes coming one on top of another. Humanity is to blame, and now humanity has almost no time to save itself.
Total devastation in Germany. Unimaginable scenes in Belgium. Horror on an underground train in China. And parts of California reduced to wasteland. This is the reality of climate change, a threat we've been warned about for decades.
The world listened, but didn't hear. The world listened, but it didn't act strongly enough. And as a result, climate change is a problem that is here now.
In a landmark UN climate report, scientists said temperatures since 1970 have risen faster than in any other 50-year period over the past 2,000 years. They fear that a target of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees will now be breached within 2 decades unless there is immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Every half a degree means more extreme weather and with it devastating human stories, like in Shropshire, where flooding wrecked Beverly Flynn's home.
It's a level of anxiousness that I've never known before because it's an element that you can't control. And when you find yourself at 3 o'clock in the morning standing in water to your chest almost, and you're not sure whether it's river water or whether it's sewer water, that is quite devastating. It plays on your mind.
Like millions of others, Beverly is desperately trying to protect her property. But how do countries protect their citizens? According to an author of today's report, we need a 5% cut in emissions year on year.
Just to put that into context, last year during the pandemic, a consequence of the global lockdowns, the carbon dioxide emissions were reduced temporarily by about 6%. So what we're talking about is reductions of that scale, but to be sustained over several decades.
Just think of the politics around that. Boris Johnson says he wants to get the balance of greenhouse emissions produced and removed from the atmosphere in the UK to net zero by 2050.
I mean, one of the things that charities say is there's a gap between the rhetoric and the reality. The rate at which you're replacing gas boilers with heat pumps is something like 20 times slower than your own targets to do it.
No, you're right, and that's why we need to ramp it up. But you look at electric vehicles, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there was no take-up, and now we're accelerating that. And I think a similar development is going to happen in terms of heat pumps and also moving people away from gas power. We're beginning that process, and we need to drive it much more aggressively.
As ministers gear up to host a major climate summit this autumn, it's not just flooding causing concern. Coastal erosion, heat waves and even wildfires are already a reality here too. Anish Guristana, News at 10.
Now, within the last 12 months alone, the climate crisis has made its presence felt with increasingly violent regularity, extreme weather events erupting in almost every corner of the globe, often with deadly consequences. In March, the Australian government declared a natural disaster in large parts of Sydney and New South Wales after the worst flooding in 60 years. 7 people died and thousands more were forced to flee their homes. Western parts of Canada saw summer temperatures rise to an unprecedented 50 degrees Celsius, more than 120 degrees Fahrenheit, leading to hundreds of sudden deaths. The most active hurricane season on record ended with its biggest storm, Hurricane Iota, leaving thousands of people homeless after it swept through Nicaragua with 155-mile-an-hour winds. This week, a heat wave in Siberia, one of the world's coldest regions, caused devastating forest fires, obliterating nearly 6,000 square miles of land and carrying smoke to the North Pole for the first time in history. And across the southern Mediterranean, in Turkey, in Italy, in Greece, there have been apocalyptic scenes with wildfires raging out of control after weeks of severe heat waves. And on Greece's second largest island today, Evia, firefighters joined by desperate residents have been trying to hold back the flames of a massive forest fire for 7 grueling days now. The Greek Prime Minister said the destruction there blackens everyone's hearts. Homes and businesses have been reduced to cinders, whilst thousands of people are being forced to flee as the fire consumes whatever stands in its relentless path.
If today's report is a warning, then the scenes on Evia are as haunting as its words. Thousands of acres of lush forest reduced to lifeless limbs in days. The firefighters' job has been relentless. We watched them trying to put out hundreds of constant, tiny flare-ups spread across this island.
Why is it difficult? Install weather-wise? Join me soon, and I'll let you know.
Roads, tracks, no problem. Because there's many fires.
This is day 7 of these wildfires, which have cost 2 lives and forced thousands to evacuate.
Today's report confirms what people here have been saying for many days now, that events like this are the reality of climate change, which this country is going to have to deal with a lot more.
Greece's most intense heat wave in a generation has left the ground vulnerable to the slightest spark. Christos and his friend are doing what they can to save their village, but he believes climate change is already changing their lives.
We haven't slept for 3 days because fire was coming one day from this side.
Have you ever known anything like this before, here?
Here, no, never. And I'm starting to believe that this is the way we're gonna live from now on.
This last week, fires have even threatened the outskirts of Athens. But a heat wave doesn't need flames to be deadly. And this ancient city has had temperatures into the 40s. It's become the first in Europe to appoint a dedicated heat officer who has a stark warning.
If we don't manage to really mitigate CO2 emissions globally, and if we're not brave, the politicians are not brave, maybe cities like Athens that have managed to survive for centuries might be uninhabited in the future.
In the coming years, Greece is likely to suffer this kind of devastation far more often. Not a natural disaster, but one that is almost certainly man-made, and for which it is already suffering the human cost. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Evia, Greece.
While fossil fuels like coal and oil have been widely identified as the climate crisis public enemy #1, methane gas is also a major offender. Methane's ability to trap heat makes it a scarily potent greenhouse gas, and levels of methane in the atmosphere are estimated to be at their highest for 800,000 years. Livestock farming is one massive producer of methane, of course, but so is drilling for oil.
The prairie land of America's Golden Triangle doesn't have the look of a climate offender. And yet these vast fields in Montana are littered with relics of the past, which now threaten the present and the future.
Can smell it from here.
Curtis Shuck has been a gas and oil man for 30 years, but he's now tracking down the abandoned, orphaned wells, which are pumping methane into the environment.
So this is specifically picking up methane gas that's coming from the well. Yeah, this is just an amazing amount of emission here.
In their prime, such wells fueled America. Now they fuel an environmental catastrophe. They've been belching methane in staggering quantities for decades, abandoned when the quest for oil and gas moved on. There are an estimated 3 million across the United States.
Why is methane such a problem?
Well, methane is a huge problem because it's so potent. For instance, the well that we're doing here today, the emission over a 1-year time frame is equal to about 1,000 automobiles. So if you think about the work that we're doing by capping this well, we're essentially taking not only 1,000 automobiles out of the equation, but over a 10-year period, we're taking 10,000 vehicles out of the equation.
And there's 3 million of these across this country.
Exactly.
You can't see methane, but you can really smell it, a stench of rotting eggs. But what's more potent than the smell is methane's ability to trap heat. That's why scientists believe that in reducing emissions, there's the possibility of reducing temperatures across the world. And that will potentially bring change, even in our lifetimes.
The teams working on these wells have worked in gas and oil drilling all their lives. The jobs they're now doing are the kind of jobs the American president believes can change this country from a dirty superpower to a clean one.
Feels really good, it does, especially my 2 young boys that I have, so it feels good that I can do something for them.
The work is cleaning up the landscape in an area challenged by rising temperatures, wildfires and droughts. The cleanup is welcomed by farmers like Sam Stewart, though he questions the wider environmental benefits.
I'm not a big climate change guy, so it's nice to clean up the air, you know, just being good stewards, getting rid of the smelly gas and stuff. So I think that's very beneficial.
And do you have any feeling that they might be able to improve the situation in terms of the temperatures?
Climate's been changing since the beginning of time. And we're hot this year, but we've been plenty cool other years, you know. So it just comes with the territory, I guess.
No one on these teams believes their work alone can tackle the climate challenge. But one well at a time, they're seeking to ensure the industry which brought this country such success does not hasten its downfall. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Montana.
Now, in any global effort to tackle the climate emergency, the elephant in the room is, of course, China. It has been the worst offender, and by a long way too, where carbon emissions are concerned. In 2019, China is said to have pumped out a massive 27% of the world's greenhouse gases. For context, the next worst country is the US with 11%. Debbie joins us from Beijing now. Debbie, is the essential problem China's just total commitment to economic growth, or is it beginning to rethink that?
Well, Tom, as we've discussed from various angles, China now commands such a role in the world that its actions on anything can impact on all of us. President Xi has put himself front and centre of this global battle, setting hugely ambitious targets of peak emissions by 2030. But while he's been making these climate pledges on one hand, he's also been ruthlessly pursuing economic growth, largely fuelled by existing coal power stations and new capacity. China also, by the way, is the world's largest producer of renewables, but it can't be both. The country has been suffering the effects of extreme weather, those floods in Henan, a tragic example, and they are adding to a political impetus for action. It is also encouraging that on climate change, China does appear willing to work with the United States. The US envoy on climate, John Kerry, is due for his second visit here in the coming weeks, and it is vital for all of us that these two superpowers, the world's two worst polluters, can set aside their differences and work together on this.
OK, Debbie, thank you very much. So that is China. What is Britain doing to help avert this global crisis? Anushka is here to discuss it. First time I've had the privilege of interviewing you on this programme. Welcome, we're so excited to have you. Look, this is a cataclysmic report, isn't it, really? Let's be honest about that. And you look around in the UK and, like, is anything really dramatic happening to our way of life? I'm not sure it is. What's the government's kind of view on this, do you think?
Well, I think the first part of their view is that because of this report, COP26 is unbelievably critical. That is the climate summit that you've been talking about in November that we're hosting. And the main thing they want to do is call on other countries to improve their targets because globally targets are not good enough. But as you say, there's going to be a lot of focus on the UK. Yes, we have got very big targets, but what are we actually doing to achieve them? One scientist said to me today, don't think about 2040 or 2050. What we need to know is what is happening now, this decade, and they don't think we're on the brink of the revolution that perhaps they think that we need to actually, you know, avoid some of the impact that we've been hearing about today. There's also going to be questions about fossil fuels, like you've been talking about. Strong language from the government on coal today, but Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, suggesting to me that there may be new drilling for oil and gas. Now, he talked about jobs, but he also said there are technologies that can capture the carbon to reduce the impact of that. Charities I speak to, not quite so convinced. And then there's a lot of pressure on the other side from Tory backbenchers who are really worried about the cost of all of this and the impact it might have on the poorest. The government today trying to come back at those arguments. Alok Sharma, who's in charge of COP26, saying the cost of inaction would be more.
OK, fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Let's see when we come to the summit. Now, what of that other big crisis that's hogged the headlines for most of this year and last? The main development on the COVID front came in Scotland today. Some nightclubs opened at midnight as it officially moved beyond level 0 and lifted most legal restrictions relating to the pandemic. Some measures remain and masks will still be required in most indoor public places and on public transport.
Yes, I know that it's frustrating to look at what appear to be anomalies. People have mentioned nightclubs versus schools, for example. Well, they're, on the face of it, that may seem anomalous, but actually, when you think about it, in schools, you've got lots of young people who are still unvaccinated, and schools are not voluntary, unlike nightclubs, where you can be vaccinated and you don't have to go if you don't want to. So we have to make different decisions for different settings.
Now, the relentless push by Taliban forces continues tonight to try to seize back control in Afghanistan as NATO forces withdraw. Provincial capitals are under siege and several have fallen. Taliban militants have planted their flag in the main square of the key northern city of Kunduz, while in Kandahar, 20 children have been killed in violence condemned by UNICEF as atrocities.
Tonight, lifting the restrictions. Wearing a smile and holding a firearm, the man on the right says inmates are being released from his prison. Long live the Taliban, says a freed prisoner. Opening the gates of the jail was a priority for the militants as they overran the city of Kunduz over the weekend. The hope that the Taliban's takeover would remain just a rural problem is being shattered in city after city. For a while, a provincial capital was falling every few hours through the vacuum left by Western withdrawal. In Kandahar alone, at least 20 children have been killed over the last few days. Government forces failed to stop the insurgents from storming the second city. Among those who escaped, One man filmed these pictures for ITV News as he left.
I was scared for my family, for my friends, for myself.
He spoke to me tonight from the relative safety of the capital, Kabul.
I have a son, I have a wife and a mother. We are like 3-4 people living in a home, and I was like scared for them. And I thought, what they're going to do after they kill me, what they're going to do.
And are you hopeful?
If they come to Kabul, then there's no hope for us. Like, they're coming near to Kabul one by one. They're capturing the cities.
President Biden has been briefed about the situation, but is said to be sticking to his withdrawal plans. And this evening, the Pentagon said the fight against the Taliban is the Afghan army's responsibility.
This is their country. These are their military forces. These are their provincial capitals, their people to defend.
One question now is whether the US will decide to keep sending fighter jets to Afghanistan, a country now facing its most perilous moment in 20 years. Rohit Kachru, News at 10, Washington.
The former Prime Minister David Cameron is tonight denying reports that he made more than £7 million before tax from Greensill Capital before it collapsed in March. According to the BBC Panorama programme, Mr Cameron allegedly made the money from cashing in shares from the finance company before it went bust and from his salary as a part-time advisor. The spokesman for Mr Cameron said he didn't receive quote, anything like the reported sums.
Also, reports that
OK, a logjam of students applying for places at universities that are already full up could tomorrow be revealed as one of the unwanted side effects of the COVID crisis. The COVID generation get their A-level results in the morning with fears there could be widespread examples of so-called grade inflation. The body that oversees the allocation of university places told us they believe there could be record demand.
What grades do you need again?
Good evening.
I need 3 Bs.
For students who've had an anxious year, tonight is one more nervous moment. Tyra's teachers will decide her fate in the morning. She wants to study law at Manchester Met.
I am very nervous. I feel like a lot of people will just sort of view my year group as the year group that, you know, didn't really sit exams, like they had the grades handed to them and sort of that approach, when actually we worked as hard as any other year group.
To assess students like Tyra, this year teachers drew on mock exams, coursework and tasks completed in class. The A-level grades they've awarded will come out tomorrow, as well as BTECs and hires in Scotland, with students in England having until the 23rd of August to appeal if they've missed out on their university, or the 17th of September if they're appealing for another reason. They can resit their exams in the autumn if they want to, but grades and demand for university places are expected to be higher than ever.
If grades are up, and that is speculative, then we know universities will be super flexible. They were last year in terms of accommodating those students, and that could lead to record numbers of students getting their first choice, which is great news.
Hello, welcome to the University of Portsmouth Clearing Line. How may I help you?
At Portsmouth University, today the crash course was in clearing, as staff trained for what could be some difficult calls tomorrow.
The way grades have been awarded this year means it's unlikely there'll be as many of the usual surprises. Instead, the shock for students may come if they're still looking for a university place. With most expected to get their predicted grades, there may be less space for those who haven't.
While Portsmouth still has plenty of places, there are expected to be fewer elsewhere, though some exceptions will be made for those who've lived through an exceptional year.
Of course, students will have had a very different experience this year, and different individuals will have experienced a different set of circumstances. So it's really important that we understand those circumstances when we're making a decision about that individual's future.
In a year when the future's not always been easy to plan for, tomorrow, most students like Tyra should finally know exactly where they're heading. Paul Brand, News at 10, Portsmouth.
And if you are waiting tonight, good luck tomorrow. Now, the last of Britain's Olympic competitors returned home from Tokyo today to a message of congratulation from the Queen, praising Team GB's extraordinary achievement. Britain finished fourth with 22 golds and 65 medals in all, an outcome whose high and lows provided food for thought about future funding.
The last of Britain's weary heroes arrived back in London after what their bosses described as the miracle of Tokyo, matching London 2012 for medals. They endured endless challenges beforehand and together with backroom staff endured 20,000 COVID tests while they were there. But by and large, they delivered.
I've enjoyed every single day and being in the village, everything, being part of Team GB, and just topped it off by winning gold and becoming Olympic champion is a dream come true.
Swimming was GB's best performing sport with 4 golds. Cycling the next, with the Kennys breaking records along the way. Boxing had its best games for more than a century.
Here's the backflip 360.
And breakthrough sports like BMX and skateboarding made a huge impact.
Just an incredible range of success and a range of diverse athletes from all backgrounds and all parts of British life. It's been a brilliant and heartwarming story, actually.
The only concerns, perhaps, two of the best funded sports, rowing, which gets 24 million, and athletics, which gets 23. While it can point to numerous fourth-placed finishes, rowing returned only 2 medals. Athletics, with a vast team of 75, provided 6, and no golds for the first time since '96, and a meagre 16 top 8 finishes. But underperforming sports won't necessarily be overly punished with funding cuts for what happened in Tokyo, although the woman who distributes millions in public money won't dodge difficult decisions either.
They'll have reviewed their performances. We'll sit down and talk to them about what they think and also going forward how this might change. And then sort of funding decision rolling forward from here. So it's not as, it often sounds quite harsh of that. You've done well, you'll be fine. You've not done well, it's over. There's no way, and sport wouldn't be successful long term like that.
The remnants of Britain's Japanese journey are being packed away and will soon be in storage until Paris. Many of Team GB's young trailblazers will be there too for what the world is hoping will be a less challenging Games. These Olympics may have brought out the best in everyone involved, but most are hoping normal service will be resumed in 3 years' time. Steve Scott, News at 10, Tokyo.
Finally, it's been a day dominated by some pretty sombre news on the climate crisis, so we wanted to leave you with a glimmer of hope. In one small area of northwest England, work is already underway to counter the effects of global warming by restoring an ancient peat bog to its pristine glory.
On the moors above the Pennines, a landscape that offers previously untapped possibilities in the battle against climate change. Almost 3,500 pools dug into this ancient bogland will capture carbon for centuries to come.
We've essentially created an artificial pool that is holding water onto the moorland plateau, and that's enabling us to plant sphagnum mosses, which will lock carbon into the peat and continue to build peat into the future.
This tiny moss will grow and grow, transforming the moorland into what's been called a giant sponge. Each one of these pools is full of peat, which, when it's wet, can soak up carbon from the atmosphere. In fact, a restored peat bog like this will store 10 times more carbon than a forest of the same size. The damage to the peatlands began during the Industrial Revolution, when smog from the factories dried it out and stopped it storing carbon like it should. Today, the skyline already looks dramatically different, and the reshaped moorland will help the country towards its target to slash greenhouse gas emissions.
It's really important that we do this, and I think the benefits are beyond just carbon and climate mitigation. Is also about other benefits. So they have, water. They're very important in terms of water provision and biodiversity.
Communities down in the valley will be better protected from flooding by the land that rises above.
It's important in general in order to capture carbon, and it's important also for natural flood management. It's also important for habitat improvement. It's interesting to think that we might be the first of the generations to leave our peatlands in a better condition than we found them.
As people try to find answers to tackling climate change, nature itself contains some of the solutions to the man-made crisis we face. Hannah Miller, News at 10 on Holcombe Moor.
That's it. See you tomorrow. Good night.